King Alexander of Valdoria had always prided himself on being a fair and just ruler. At 62 years old, he had weathered many storms during his 25-year reign, but nothing had prepared him for what he would discover on that fateful autumn evening. The golden leaves of the palace gardens rustled in the wind as he made his way through the corridors of Valdoria Castle, his mind heavy with the weight of recent political tensions. Queen Isabella had been his wife for 18 years, having married him 5 years after the tragic death of his first wife, Queen Catherine. Isabella was known throughout the kingdom for her charitable work and her dedication to environmental causes. She had won the hearts of the people with her warm smile and genuine concern for their welfare. The press often called her the people's queen, and Alexander had always been proud to have her by his side. However, in recent months, Alexander had noticed subtle changes in Isabella's behavior. She had become more secretive about her schedule, often claiming to be at charity events that seemed to have no public record. Her personal assistant, Margaret, had been evasive when Alexander asked about the Queen's whereabouts on several occasions. There were whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when he entered a room, and phone calls that Isabella would take in private, speaking in hushed tones. The first real sign that something was amiss came 3 weeks earlier when Alexander discovered a series of encrypted messages on Isabella's personal computer. He had only stumbled upon them by accident when he was looking for photographs from their recent state visit to neighboring Astoria. The messages were coded, but Alexander had served in military intelligence before ascending to the throne, and he recognized patterns that suggested clandestine communication. His trusted advisor, Lord Chancellor Edmund Blackwood, had served the crown for over 30 years. When Alexander confided his concerns to Edmund, the older man's face had grown grave. "Your Majesty," Edmund had said in his measured tone, "perhaps it would be wise to conduct a discreet investigation before drawing any conclusions." Alexander had agreed, though every fiber of his being hoped that his suspicions were unfounded. The investigation, led by Sir James Thornfield, the head of palace security, had been proceeding quietly for 2 weeks. Sir James was a decorated former colonel who had joined the Royal Household Guard 15 years earlier. His loyalty to the crown was unquestionable, and his discretion was legendary. He had assembled a small team of trusted individuals to monitor the Queen's activities without arousing suspicion. Isabella's schedule had become increasingly erratic. She would leave the palace for what she claimed were private charity meetings, but the security team's surveillance revealed that she was visiting locations that had nothing to do with any registered charitable organizations. On 3 separate occasions, she had been observed entering a nondescript building in the older section of Valdoria's capital city, always arriving alone and staying for several hours. The building in question belonged to a company called Heritage Solutions Limited, which, according to public records, dealt in historical document restoration. However, further investigation revealed that the company had been established only 6 months earlier, and its funding sources were unclear. The sole proprietor was listed as one Dr. Marcus Whitfield, a man with an impressive academic background but no previous business experience. Alexander's sleepless nights had become more frequent as the investigation progressed. He would often find himself pacing the royal chambers, staring out at the moonlit gardens where he and Isabella had walked together countless times, planning their future and discussing their dreams for the kingdom. The irony was not lost on him that while he was grappling with personal betrayal, he was also dealing with increasing pressure from Parliament regarding the proposed Constitutional Reform Act. The Reform Act was a contentious piece of legislation that would significantly reduce the monarchy's ceremonial powers while strengthening Parliament's authority. Public opinion was divided, with traditionalists supporting the crown and progressives pushing for change. Isabella had always been supportive of Alexander's position on constitutional matters, or so he had believed. Now he wondered if her recent secretive behavior was somehow connected to the political turmoil surrounding the crown. Prince William, Alexander's 28-year-old son from his first marriage, had also noticed his stepmother's strange behavior. William had always maintained a cordial but somewhat distant relationship with Isabella, respecting her role as queen while never fully accepting her as a replacement for his beloved mother. Recently, however, he had begun to express concerns to his father about Isabella's influence on certain policy decisions. "Father," William had said during a private dinner just days earlier, "I've heard rumors in Parliament that someone close to the crown is providing information about your private deliberations on the Reform Act. The timing of certain opposition maneuvers suggests they have inside knowledge of your strategy." Alexander had dismissed his son's concerns at the time, but Now those words echoed ominously in his mind. The palace staff had also begun to notice irregularities. Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, the head housekeeper who had served the royal family for over 20 years, had discreetly mentioned to Sir James that the Queen's personal quarters had been accessed at unusual hours. Security cameras showed Isabella entering her private study late at night and remaining there for extended periods, sometimes until dawn. Dr. Whitfield's background became increasingly suspicious under scrutiny. While his academic credentials were legitimate, his sudden transition from university professor to document restoration expert seemed implausible. More troubling was the discovery that he had recently purchased several high-end encrypted communication devices and had been making regular trips to Astoria, Valdoria's neighboring kingdom with which relations had become strained in recent years. The kingdom of Astoria was ruled by King Leopold, a man known for his aggressive expansionist policies and his desire to undermine Valdoria's influence in the region. Intelligence reports suggested that Leopold had been actively working to destabilize Valdoria's government by supporting opposition groups and spreading propaganda about the ineffectiveness of the monarchy. If Isabella was somehow connected to Astorian interests, the implications would be devastating. Alexander's mind raced as he considered the possibilities. Could his wife, the woman he had trusted with his heart and his kingdom, be engaged in espionage? The thought seemed preposterous, yet the evidence was mounting. Isabella had access to the most sensitive information about Valdoria's government, military capabilities, and diplomatic strategies. She attended private council meetings, had access to classified documents, and was privy to Alexander's most confidential conversations with foreign leaders. The personal betrayal was crushing enough, but the potential threat to national security made the situation exponentially more serious. If Isabella was indeed passing information to hostile foreign powers, she would be guilty of high treason, a crime that carried severe penalties under Valdorian law. The thought of prosecuting his own wife filled Alexander with dread, but his duty to the crown and to his people had to take precedence over his personal feelings. Sir James had requested a private meeting for this evening to present his preliminary findings. As Alexander made his way to the secure briefing room in the palace's east wing, he steeled himself for what he might learn. The corridor seemed longer than usual, lined with portraits of his ancestors who had ruled Valdoria for over 4 centuries. He wondered what they would think of the crisis that now threatened to tear apart everything they had built. The briefing room was Spartan and windowless, designed for the discussion of sensitive matters. Sir James was waiting with a thick folder of documents and photographs. His usually composed demeanor showed signs of strain as he stood to greet his sovereign. "Your Majesty," he began formally, "I'm afraid the situation is more serious than we initially suspected." Alexander took his seat at the head of the conference table, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "Tell me everything, James. I need to know the truth, regardless of how painful it might be." Sir James opened the folder and began laying out photographs, documents, and surveillance reports. Each piece of evidence painted a darker picture of Isabella's activities. The photographs showed Isabella entering and leaving the Heritage Solutions building on multiple occasions, always alone, and always taking circuitous routes to avoid main thoroughfares. More damning were the images of her meetings with Dr. Whitfield, captured through telephoto lenses. The body language in these photographs suggested intimate familiarity between the two individuals, far beyond what would be expected in a professional relationship. Financial records revealed that substantial sums of money had been flowing through Heritage Solutions from accounts traced to Astorian shell companies. Dr. Whitfield's lifestyle had also improved dramatically since establishing his business, with purchases including a luxury vehicle and a country estate that seemed well beyond the means of a small document restoration business. Most troubling of all were the intercepted communications. The palace's intelligence service had finally managed to decrypt some of the messages found on Isabella's computer. The content was coded, but the intelligence analysts had identified references to the project, delivery schedules, and compensation packages. More specifically, there were mentions of dates that coincided with important government meetings and policy announcements. "Your Majesty," Sir James continued, his voice heavy with the gravity of the situation, "we have reason to believe that classified information about the Constitutional Reform Act, including your private negotiation strategies, has been compromised. The timing of opposition responses suggests they have been receiving detailed intelligence about your plans." Alexander felt his heart sink as the full implications became clear. Not only was he facing a personal betrayal of the deepest kind, but the security of his kingdom was at stake. The evidence suggested that Isabella had been systematically collecting and transmitting sensitive government information to foreign agents. Her position as queen gave her unprecedented access to state secrets, and she had apparently been exploiting that access for months, possibly longer. The realization that he had been sharing his bed with a traitor filled Alexander with a mixture of rage and profound sadness. As the briefing concluded, Sir James presented one final piece of evidence, a surveillance schedule showing that Isabella was planning another meeting with Dr. Whitfield tomorrow evening. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, "this may be our opportunity to gather definitive proof of the extent of her activities. We can position surveillance teams to document the exchange and potentially intercept any materials being transferred." Alexander stared at the documents spread before him, each one a nail in the coffin of his marriage and a threat to his kingdom. The decision he faced was agonizing: allow the surveillance to proceed and confirm his worst fears, or confront Isabella immediately and risk losing the opportunity to understand the full scope of the conspiracy. The weight of the crown had never felt heavier than it did at that moment, as duty and personal loyalty waged war in his heart. Alexander spent the entire night walking through the palace gardens, his mind tormented by the decision before him. The autumn air was crisp and cold, matching the chill that had settled in his heart. By dawn, he had made his choice. The surveillance would proceed. His duty to Valdoria and its people outweighed his personal feelings, no matter how devastating the consequences might be for his marriage and his family. The next day passed with excruciating slowness. Alexander maintained his normal schedule, attending morning briefings with his ministers and hosting a luncheon for visiting diplomats from the neighboring kingdom of Thessaria. Throughout these activities, he found himself studying Isabella's every word and gesture, searching for signs of deception that he had previously missed. Her behavior seemed normal on the surface, but now he noticed the subtle tension in her voice when she spoke about her evening plans. "I'll be attending a charity board meeting this evening," Isabella had mentioned casually over breakfast, not meeting his eyes as she buttered her toast. "The Children's Hospital Foundation is planning a new wing, and they need input on the architectural designs." The lie came so easily to her lips that Alexander wondered how many other deceptions he had accepted without question over the years. Prince William joined his father for their weekly private dinner that afternoon, a tradition they had maintained since Alexander's coronation. The young prince had inherited his father's sharp intellect and his late mother's compassionate nature, making him a popular figure among the people and a trusted advisor to his father. As they dined in the private family quarters, William seemed to sense his father's distress. "You seem troubled today, father," William observed, setting down his wine glass. "Is it the Reform Act debate? I heard that Parliament is planning to fast-track the vote." Alexander looked at his son's concerned face and felt the weight of the secret he was carrying. He longed to confide in William, but until he had definitive proof of Isabella's treachery, he couldn't risk damaging her reputation or creating a scandal that might destabilize the monarchy. "The political situation is certainly challenging," Alexander replied carefully. "Sometimes the burdens of leadership feel heavier than usual." It wasn't entirely a lie, though the political pressures were the least of his worries at that moment. William seemed to accept this explanation, though his perceptive eyes suggested he suspected there was more to his father's distress than parliamentary politics. Meanwhile, Sir James was coordinating the evening's surveillance operation from a command center set up in the palace's secure communications facility. His team consisted of 6 highly trained operatives who had been briefed on the sensitivity of the mission. They understood that they were not merely protecting the crown from external threats, but potentially uncovering treason from within the royal family itself. The Heritage Solutions building was located on Aldrich Street in the historic quarter of Valdoria's capital. The area was known for its narrow cobblestone streets and Victorian-era architecture, making surveillance challenging but not impossible. Sir James had positioned his operatives at strategic points around the building, ensuring that every entrance and exit was monitored. High-tech listening devices had been placed near the windows of Dr. Whitfield's office, and telephoto cameras were ready to document any exchange of materials. Dr. Marcus Whitfield arrived at his office building at precisely 7:30 in the evening. Surveillance photographs showed him carrying a leather briefcase and what appeared to be a small package wrapped in brown paper. His demeanor was nervous, and he repeatedly checked his watch and looked up and down the street as if expecting someone or watching for potential threats. Isabella left the palace at 8 o'clock, telling her personal security detail that she would be attending a private charity meeting and preferred minimal protection for the sake of discretion. This request was unusual but not unprecedented, as the Queen had occasionally requested reduced security for sensitive charitable work involving confidential beneficiaries. Her regular bodyguard, Detective Sergeant Patricia Collins, was instructed to maintain a discreet distance while ensuring the Queen's safety. The journey to Aldrich Street took Isabella through some of Valdoria's most scenic neighborhoods. She drove her personal vehicle, a modest sedan that allowed her to blend in with regular traffic. The surveillance team tracked her progress through a network of street cameras and mobile units, maintaining constant communication with Sir James at the command center. As Isabella's vehicle turned onto Aldrich Street, the tension in the command center was palpable. Sir James watched multiple video feeds simultaneously, his experienced eyes missing nothing as the Queen parked her car 2 blocks away from the Heritage Solutions building and began walking toward her destination. She moved with purpose but also with obvious caution, stopping occasionally to check her surroundings in a manner that suggested she was conscious of potential surveillance. At 8:45, Isabella entered the Heritage Solutions building through a side entrance that was not visible from the main street. The surveillance team immediately activated their recording equipment as she made her way to the 3rd floor where Dr. Whitfield's office was located. Through the enhanced listening devices, they could hear muffled voices but could not yet make out specific words. Inside the office, Isabella greeted Dr. Whitfield with a familiarity that went far beyond a professional relationship. The surveillance team managed to capture partial audio of their conversation through directional microphones aimed at the office windows. What they heard confirmed their worst fears about the nature of Isabella's activities. The Reform Act vote has been moved up. Isabella's voice came through the audio feed, slightly distorted but clearly audible. Alexander is planning to make a direct appeal to Parliament tomorrow morning. He believes he can sway the moderate faction with emotional arguments about tradition and continuity. Dr. Whitfield's response was partially obscured by traffic noise from the street below, but the words "our friends in Astoria" and "compensation" were clearly distinguishable. The conversation continued for nearly an hour, during which time Isabella provided detailed information about the King's strategy for opposing the Constitutional Reform Act. She revealed the names of key parliamentary allies, discussed planned compromises on specific clauses, and even mentioned private conversations she had overheard between Alexander and Lord Chancellor Blackwood. Each revelation was more damaging than the last, painting a clear picture of systematic espionage. Most shocking of all was Isabella's disclosure of information about Valdoria's military capabilities and defensive strategies. She provided Dr. Whitfield with details about troop deployments along the Asturian border, discussed the kingdom's missile defense systems, and revealed intelligence assessments about potential threats from hostile nations. This information went far beyond political intelligence and entered the realm of national security secrets that could endanger the lives of Valdorian citizens and military personnel. The audio quality improved during the middle portion of their meeting, allowing the surveillance team to record entire conversations word for word. Isabella's voice carried no hint of remorse or uncertainty as she betrayed her husband's trust and her adopted country's secrets. If anything, she seemed energized by her clandestine activities, speaking with an enthusiasm that suggested she found the espionage work exciting and rewarding. The timeline is accelerating. Dr. Whitfield's voice became clearer as he apparently moved closer to the window. Our contacts in Astoria are pleased with the quality of intelligence you've provided, but they need more specific information about the succession plans. King Leopold is particularly interested in Prince William's political leanings and his potential alliances with foreign powers. Isabella's response chilled the surveillance team to the bone. William is naive and idealistic, much like his father. He can be manipulated if the approach is subtle enough. The conversation then turned to financial matters, with Dr. Whitfield presenting Isabella with what appeared to be a bank statement showing substantial deposits to an offshore account. "Your compensation for this quarter," he said, "with a bonus for the exceptional quality of the military intelligence. Our friends are very generous when their expectations are exceeded." Isabella examined the statement with obvious satisfaction, commenting that the amounts were sufficient to maintain her lifestyle after she completed her mission and relocated to a non-extradition country. At this point, Sir James realized that they were dealing with more than simple espionage or even political treason. Isabella was planning to flee Valdoria altogether, suggesting that her activities were part of a larger plot with an endgame that went beyond mere intelligence gathering. The implications were staggering. The Queen of Valdoria was not only betraying state secrets, but was apparently planning to abandon her position and possibly her husband when her usefulness to foreign agents was exhausted. The meeting concluded with Dr. Whitfield handing Isabella a sealed envelope and a small electronic device that appeared to be an encrypted communication tool. "Your next assignment," he explained, along with the new encryption protocols. "The timeline is critical now, so security must be absolute." Isabella accepted the items without hesitation and placed them in her handbag alongside what the surveillance team assumed were classified documents she had brought from the palace. As Isabella prepared to leave the building, the surveillance team documented her exit with high-resolution photographs that clearly showed her carrying materials she had not possessed when she entered. The evidence was now overwhelming. Queen Isabella was undoubtedly engaged in espionage against her own kingdom, and the scope of her treachery extended far beyond anything Alexander had imagined in his worst nightmares. The return journey to the palace was conducted under even more intensive surveillance than her outbound trip. Isabella seemed more relaxed now, apparently confident that her activities had gone undetected. She even stopped at a small cafe near the palace to purchase coffee, chatting pleasantly with the proprietor as if she were returning from a perfectly innocent evening out. The normalcy of her behavior made her betrayal even more chilling to the operatives who were documenting her every move. Back at the palace, Sir James was already preparing his report for King Alexander. The audio recordings, photographs, and video footage provided irrefutable evidence of Isabella's treasonous activities. More importantly, they had documented her receipt of what appeared to be new intelligence assignments from her foreign handlers, suggesting that her espionage work was ongoing and potentially escalating. The evidence package that Sir James assembled painted a devastating picture of betrayal that went to the very heart of the monarchy. Isabella had not only violated her marriage vows and her oath of allegiance to Valdoria, but had potentially endangered the lives of military personnel and compromised the kingdom's national security. Her actions constituted high treason under Valdorian law, crimes that carried the most severe penalties the legal system could impose. As Alexander waited in his private study for Sir James's report, he found himself staring at a photograph of his wedding to Isabella 18 years earlier. She looked radiant in her wedding gown, smiling up at him with what he had believed was genuine love and devotion. Now he wondered if even that joy had been an elaborate deception, part of a long-term plan to infiltrate the royal family for espionage purposes. The knock on his study door at midnight signaled the end of his marriage and the beginning of the most serious crisis his reign had ever faced. As Sir James entered with the surveillance report, Alexander steeled himself for the confirmation of his worst fears and the painful decisions that would inevitably follow. The evidence spread across Alexander's mahogany desk was damning beyond any shadow of doubt. Sir James had meticulously organized the surveillance materials, audio transcripts, high-resolution photographs, video footage, and financial records that painted an undeniable picture of Isabella's treachery. As Alexander reviewed each piece of evidence, his heart grew heavier with the realization that his wife had been living a double life for months, possibly years. "The audio quality from the directional microphones is exceptional, Your Majesty," Sir James explained in his measured tone. "We have clear recordings of the Queen providing classified information about military deployments, intelligence assessments, and your private strategic discussions regarding the Constitutional Reform Act." He played selected portions of the recordings, and Alexander winced as he heard Isabella's voice casually betraying secrets that could endanger the kingdom. The photographs were equally devastating. High-resolution images showed Isabella accepting envelopes, electronic devices, and what appeared to be cash payments from Dr. Whitfield. Her body language in these images suggested comfort and familiarity with the clandestine activities, indicating that this was not her first involvement in such operations. Most troubling were the images of her examining bank statements with obvious satisfaction, showing a level of financial motivation that suggested her betrayal was not ideological but purely mercenary. Alexander's hands trembled slightly as he examined the financial records that Sir James had obtained through intelligence channels. The offshore accounts linked to Isabella showed deposits totaling nearly £2 million over the past 8 months, far exceeding any legitimate income she might have earned from charitable work or personal investments. The timing of the deposits correlated precisely with major political and military decisions that had been made during private council meetings to which Isabella had access. The implications extend far beyond simple espionage, Your Majesty, Sir James continued. Based on the conversations we recorded, it appears that Queen Isabella is part of a larger intelligence operation coordinated by King Leopold's government in Astoria. Her mission seems to be gathering comprehensive intelligence about Valdoria's political vulnerabilities, military capabilities, and succession plans. The revelation that Isabella was working for a hostile foreign power made her crimes even more serious under Valdorian law. Prince William had been summoned to join this emergency briefing, though Alexander had not yet explained the full nature of the crisis. When the young prince entered the study at midnight, he immediately sensed the gravity of the situation from his father's expression and Sir James's formal demeanor. "Father, what's happened?" William asked, his voice filled with concern. "Is the kingdom under threat?" Alexander looked at his son with profound sadness, knowing that the revelation he was about to share would shatter William's already complicated relationship with his stepmother. "Son, please sit down. What I'm about to tell you will be deeply disturbing, but you need to know the truth about Isabella's activities." He gestured to the evidence spread across his desk, and William's eyes widened as he began to comprehend the magnitude of what he was seeing. As Alexander explained the surveillance operation and its findings, William's expression shifted from confusion to shock to barely controlled anger. The young prince had never fully trusted Isabella, maintaining a respectful but distant relationship since his father's remarriage. However, even his worst suspicions had not prepared him for the reality of her betrayal. "She's been stealing state secrets?" William asked incredulously. "For how long? How much has she compromised?" Sir James answered with clinical precision, outlining the scope of Isabella's espionage activities and the potential damage to national security. "Based on our analysis, Your Royal Highness, the Queen has had access to virtually every sensitive discussion and document in the palace for the past 18 years. While we can only definitively prove 8 months of treasonous activity, the actual duration of her espionage could be significantly longer." The implications of this statement were staggering, suggesting that Valdoria's enemies might have been receiving intelligence about the kingdom's most sensitive affairs for nearly 2 decades. The conversation, then, turned to the immediate crisis facing the monarchy. Isabella was scheduled to return to the palace within the hour, and Alexander had to decide how to confront her without alerting other potential conspirators or triggering a broader intelligence operation. Sir James recommended immediate arrest and interrogation, but Alexander understood that arresting the Queen would create a constitutional crisis that could destabilize the entire kingdom. "We must consider the broader implications, Your Majesty," Lord Chancellor Edmund Blackwood interjected as he entered the study. He had been briefed on the situation and summoned for emergency consultation. If news of the Queen's arrest becomes public, it could trigger a complete loss of confidence in the monarchy at the worst possible time. Parliament is already debating constitutional reforms, and this scandal could provide ammunition for those who want to abolish the crown entirely. The political ramifications were indeed complex. The Constitutional Reform Act was scheduled for a crucial vote in just 3 days, and any major scandal involving the royal family could sway public opinion decisively against the monarchy. Anti-royalist factions would undoubtedly use Isabella's treachery as evidence that the entire institution was corrupt and untrustworthy. The irony was bitter. Isabella's betrayal could ultimately achieve King Leopold's goal of weakening Valdoria's government without any direct military action. Prince William proposed a different approach that would protect both national security and the monarchy's reputation. "What if we confront her privately first?" he suggested. "Give her an opportunity to cooperate and provide full disclosure about her activities in exchange for avoiding a public trial. We could arrange for her quiet departure from the kingdom while maintaining the fiction that she's taking an extended charitable mission abroad." The proposal had merit, but Alexander wondered if Isabella could be trusted to honor any agreement given her demonstrated capacity for deception. The discussion was interrupted by a soft knock on the study door. Mrs. Hartwell, the head housekeeper, entered with obvious reluctance. "Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion, but Queen Isabella has returned to the palace and is asking about your whereabouts. She seems concerned that you're not in your chambers." The timing was unfortunate, but not unexpected. Isabella's return meant that Alexander would have to face her immediately rather than having more time to plan his approach. Alexander made a decision that would change the course of Valdorian history. "Bring her here," he instructed Mrs. Hartwell. Tell her that I need to discuss urgent matters related to tomorrow's parliamentary session. As the housekeeper departed to deliver the message, Alexander turned to his son and advisors with a heavy heart. I want all of you to remain here as witnesses to whatever transpires. This confrontation will likely determine not only Isabella's fate, but the future of our kingdom. The wait for Isabella's arrival seemed interminable. Alexander found himself pacing the study while Sir James secured the surveillance evidence, and Prince William positioned himself near the fireplace with a clear view of the entire room. Lord Chancellor Blackwood took his customary seat at the conference table, his legal training evident in the way he organized documents that might be needed for formal proceedings. The atmosphere was tense with anticipation and dread. Isabella entered the study with her characteristic grace and confidence, apparently unaware that her treacherous activities had been discovered. She was still wearing the elegant dark coat she had worn to her clandestine meeting, and Alexander noticed that she carried the same handbag that had contained the materials Dr. Whitfield had given her. "Alexander, darling," she said warmly, approaching to kiss him on the cheek. "Mrs. Hartwell said you wanted to discuss parliamentary matters. Surely it's rather late for political strategy sessions." The normalcy of her demeanor was chilling given what Alexander now knew about her activities. She seemed genuinely puzzled by the late-night gathering, showing no signs of guilt or nervousness that might indicate awareness of her exposure. Either Isabella was an exceptionally skilled actress, or she was so confident in her deception that she believed herself completely safe from detection. "Isabella," Alexander began formally, his voice steady despite the emotional turmoil he was experiencing. "We need to discuss your activities this evening. Specifically, your meeting with Dr. Marcus Whitfield at the Heritage Solutions building on Aldrich Street." He watched her face carefully for any reaction, and was rewarded with a brief flash of shock before her features settled into a carefully neutral expression. "I'm not sure what you mean, Alexander," Isabella replied calmly, though her hands tightened almost imperceptibly around her handbag. "I attended a charity board meeting this evening, as I mentioned this morning. Perhaps there's been some confusion about my schedule." The lie came easily to her, delivered with such conviction that Alexander might have believed her if not for the overwhelming evidence of her deception. Sir James stepped forward and placed the surveillance photographs on the desk where Isabella could see them. The images clearly showed her entering and leaving the Heritage Solutions building, accepting materials from Dr. Whitfield, and examining what appeared to be financial documents. Her face went pale as she realized the extent to which her activities had been monitored and documented. "These photographs were taken this evening," Sir James stated matter-of-factly. "We also have audio recordings of your conversation with Dr. Whitfield, including your disclosure of classified military information and intelligence about the Constitutional Reform Act negotiations." He activated a digital recorder, and Isabella's own voice filled the room as she betrayed state secrets to her foreign contact. The color drained from Isabella's face as she heard her own words played back to her. For a moment, she seemed to consider maintaining her denial, but the overwhelming evidence made such a strategy impossible. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and fixed Alexander with a defiant stare that revealed the cold, calculating nature that had been hidden beneath her public persona for so many years. "How long have you known?" she asked quietly, her voice stripped of the warmth and affection that Alexander had grown accustomed to over their years of marriage. The question confirmed her guilt more definitively than any confession could have done, and Alexander felt the last vestiges of hope for their relationship crumble away. "Long enough to understand the full scope of your betrayal," Alexander replied, his voice heavy with disappointment and anger. "The question now is whether you're prepared to cooperate fully with our investigation and provide complete information about your espionage activities, or whether you prefer to face the full consequences of high treason under Valdorian law." The ultimatum was stark, but necessary. Isabella's cooperation could potentially limit the damage to national security, while her continued defiance would force a public trial that could destroy the monarchy. Isabella's response would determine not only her own fate, but the future stability of the kingdom that Alexander had devoted his life to protecting. Isabella's defiant stare held for a long moment before something shifted in her expression. The mask of the devoted queen finally slipped away completely, revealing a cold, calculating woman who had been playing a role for nearly 2 decades. When she spoke, her voice carried none of the warmth and compassion that had endeared her to the people of Valdoria. "You want to know the truth, Alexander? The truth is that you and your pathetic little kingdom have been living on borrowed time for years. The venom in her words shocked everyone in the room, even those who had suspected her treachery. Prince William stepped forward protectively toward his father, while Sir James moved closer to Isabella, ready to intervene if she attempted anything dangerous. Lord Chancellor Blackwood began taking detailed notes, recognizing that Isabella's statements would likely be crucial evidence in any legal proceedings that followed. "I've been feeding information to King Leopold's intelligence service for 3 years," Isabella continued, her voice gaining strength as she abandoned all pretense. "Your military capabilities, your diplomatic strategies, your pathetic attempts at constitutional reform. Leopold has known about all of it before you've even finished planning. Did you really think that Valdoria could remain independent and prosperous while surrounded by stronger, more ambitious nations?" Alexander felt as though he had been physically struck by her revelation. 3 years of systematic betrayal meant that virtually every major decision of his recent reign had been compromised from the beginning. Military deployments, trade negotiations, diplomatic initiatives, all of it had been known to Valdoria's enemies before the plans could even be implemented. The scope of the damage to national security was almost incomprehensible. "Why?" Alexander asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you betray the kingdom that welcomed you, the people who loved you, the husband who trusted you?" The question came from his heart rather than his head, a desperate attempt to understand how the woman he had shared his life with could have deceived him so completely. Isabella's laugh was bitter and contemptuous. "Love? Trust? You're even more naive than I thought, Alexander. I married you because King Leopold needed an asset inside the Valdorian royal family. My entire relationship with you has been a carefully orchestrated intelligence operation. Did you really believe that a sophisticated woman like me would fall in love with a boring, idealistic monarch of a second-rate kingdom?" The cruelty of her words was designed to inflict maximum emotional damage, and they succeeded. Alexander had to steady himself against his desk as the full implications of her revelation sank in. Not only had Isabella been spying on Valdoria, but their entire marriage had been based on deception from the very beginning. Every moment of apparent happiness, every shared experience, every intimate conversation, all of it had been a lie designed to facilitate espionage. Prince William could no longer contain his anger at seeing his father's pain. "You're a monster," he said coldly. "My father gave you everything: a crown, a kingdom, a family. He treated you with respect and honor, and you repaid him with betrayal and humiliation." His voice shook with barely controlled rage as he continued. "My mother was worth 1,000 of you. At least now father can see what kind of person you really are." Isabella turned her attention to Prince William with a sneer that revealed her true feelings about her stepson. "Your precious mother was weak, just like your father. She would never have had the intelligence or the courage to work for something greater than this insignificant kingdom. At least my actions serve a purpose beyond maintaining your family's outdated traditions and meaningless ceremonies." The insult to Prince William's late mother was too much for Alexander to bear. His grief and anger finally overcame his natural restraint, and he stepped forward with his hands clenched into fists. "You will not speak of Catherine in that manner," he said with quiet fury. "Whatever else you may be, you have no right to dishonor the memory of a woman who is everything you could never be: honest, loyal, and genuinely dedicated to the welfare of this kingdom and its people." Sir James intervened before the confrontation could escalate further. "Your Majesty, perhaps we should focus on documenting the full extent of the security breach," he suggested diplomatically. "We need to understand exactly what information has been compromised so that we can take appropriate countermeasures." His professional training helped him maintain focus on the practical aspects of the crisis despite the emotional drama unfolding before him. Isabella seemed to realize that her position was hopeless and that further antagonism would only make her situation worse. "Fine," she said with resignation. "What do you want to know? I suppose there's no point in maintaining the charade any longer." She moved to the nearest chair and sat down heavily, finally, acknowledging the reality of her exposed treachery. "Start with the scope of information you've provided to King Leopold," Lord Chancellor Blackwood instructed, his legal training evident in his systematic approach to gathering evidence. "We need a complete accounting of every document, conversation, and strategic discussion that you've compromised. The security of the kingdom depends on our ability to assess and mitigate the damage you've caused." Over the next 2 hours, Isabella provided a detailed confession that revealed the devastating extent of her espionage activities. She had systematically photographed classified documents, recorded private conversations using concealed devices, and provided her Astorian handlers with detailed intelligence about Valdoria's military capabilities, economic vulnerabilities, and political divisions. Most damaging of all, she had provided advance warning about planned security operations, allowing hostile agents to evade capture and continue their activities within Valdoria's borders. The financial arrangements were as extensive as they were damaging to Isabella's credibility. King Leopold's government had paid her nearly £3 million over the course of their collaboration, with additional promises of sanctuary and a comfortable lifestyle in Astoria once her mission was complete. The money had been funneled through a network of shell companies and offshore accounts designed to avoid detection by Valdorian intelligence services. Perhaps most troubling was Isabella's revelation about other assets that King Leopold had cultivated within Valdoria's government and society. She provided names and details about 3 other individuals who had been recruited as intelligence sources: a mid-level official in the foreign ministry, a telecommunications engineer with access to secure communications systems, and a society journalist who had been gathering information about the private lives and vulnerabilities of prominent political figures. The plan was always to create a comprehensive intelligence network that could eventually facilitate a bloodless takeover. Isabella explained with disturbing clinical detachment. Leopold believes that Valdoria's independence is an historical accident that should be corrected through political and economic pressure rather than military force. My role was to provide the intelligence necessary to identify and exploit weaknesses in your government and society. Alexander struggled to comprehend the full scope of the conspiracy that had been operating under his nose for years. The revelation that Isabella was just one part of a larger espionage network meant that Valdoria's security had been compromised at multiple levels. Every aspect of the kingdom's defense against foreign interference would need to be reviewed and probably rebuilt from the ground up. The discussion, then, turned to the immediate question of how to handle Isabella's arrest and prosecution. Under Valdorian law, high treason was punishable by life imprisonment, and the evidence against Isabella was overwhelming. However, the political implications of prosecuting a queen for espionage could destabilize the monarchy and provide ammunition for those who sought to abolish the crown entirely. A public trial would be a catastrophe for the monarchy, Lord Chancellor Blackwood observed. The opposition would use every detail of Isabella's treachery to argue that the royal family cannot be trusted with state secrets or constitutional authority. The Constitutional Reform Act would almost certainly pass by overwhelming margins, and there would likely be calls for complete abolition of the monarchy. Prince William proposed an alternative approach that would protect both justice and the stability of the kingdom. What if we offer Isabella a choice, he suggested. She could face a public trial with all its consequences, or she could accept immediate exile with the understanding that any attempt to return to Valdoria or continue her espionage activities would result in severe prosecution. We could maintain the public fiction that she's taking an extended charitable mission abroad while quietly ensuring that she can never again threaten our security. The proposal had several advantages, but Alexander was troubled by the idea of allowing Isabella to escape serious consequences for her treachery. She committed high treason, he said firmly. The law demands justice, and the people of Valdoria deserve to know that those who betray the kingdom will be punished appropriately. His sense of duty to his people and his oath as king made it difficult for him to consider any arrangement that might appear to excuse Isabella's crimes. Sir James offered a practical perspective that helped clarify the difficult choice they faced. Your Majesty, our primary obligation is to protect the security and stability of the kingdom, he observed. While justice is important, we must consider whether a public trial would ultimately serve the national interest. Isabella's cooperation in identifying and neutralizing the remaining members of the spy network might be more valuable than her imprisonment. The debate continued as dawn approached, with each participant weighing the competing demands of justice, security, and political stability. Isabella herself remained silent during most of this discussion, apparently recognizing that her fate was being decided by forces beyond her control. Occasionally, she would provide additional details about her espionage activities when directly questioned, but she showed no signs of remorse or regret about her betrayal. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows of the study, Alexander made the most difficult decision of his reign. The choice he was about to announce would determine not only Isabella's fate, but the future course of Valdorian history, setting precedents for how the kingdom would handle threats to its security and stability in the years to come. King Alexander stood at the window of his study as the first rays of sunlight painted the palace gardens in golden hues. The irony was not lost on him that this beautiful dawn was marking one of the darkest days in Valdorian royal history. After hours of agonizing deliberation, he had reached a decision that would prioritize the security and stability of his kingdom above his personal desire for justice. "Isabella," he said, turning to face his wife one final time, "you will be given a choice that is more merciful than you deserve. You can face a public trial for high treason, with all the evidence of your espionage activities presented to the court and the people of Valdoria. The penalty, if convicted, would be life imprisonment. Alternatively, you can accept immediate and permanent exile from this kingdom, with the understanding that any attempt to return or continue your treacherous activities will result in swift and severe prosecution." Isabella looked up from her chair with a mixture of relief and calculated interest. She had clearly been hoping for such an offer, recognizing that a public trial would likely result in her spending the rest of her life in prison. "What are the terms of this exile?" she asked cautiously, her legal instincts evident despite her compromised position. "Where would I go, and what guarantees would I have for my safety and financial security?" Lord Chancellor Blackwood had anticipated these questions and had prepared a comprehensive proposal during their lengthy discussion. "You would be escorted immediately to the airport and flown to a neutral country of your choosing, with the understanding that you can never return to Valdoria or any of its territories. Your offshore accounts would remain accessible to you, though any additional payments from hostile intelligence services would be considered evidence of continued treasonous activity." The financial arrangements were deliberately generous, designed to remove any incentive for Isabella to continue her espionage career or attempt to sell information about Valdoria to other hostile powers. Prince William had argued for seizing all of her ill-gotten gains, but Sir James had convinced them that allowing her to keep the money would reduce the likelihood of her becoming an ongoing security threat. "In exchange for this clemency," Alexander continued, his voice heavy with the weight of his decision, "you will provide complete and detailed information about all aspects of King Leopold's intelligence network in Valdoria. You will identify every agent, every source, and every operation that you are aware of. You will also submit to a comprehensive debriefing with our intelligence services before your departure." The debriefing requirement was crucial for national security purposes. Isabella's knowledge of the Asturian intelligence network could help Valdoria identify and neutralize threats that might otherwise continue operating undetected for years. Sir James had assembled a team of experienced interrogation specialists who would ensure that Isabella provided accurate and complete information about her fellow spies. Isabella considered the offer for several minutes, weighing her options with the cold calculation that had characterized her espionage career. Eventually, she nodded her acceptance. "I agree to your terms," she said simply. "When would this debriefing begin, and how long would it take?" Her businesslike approach to negotiating the terms of her exile demonstrated the extent to which she had compartmentalized her emotions and focused solely on practical considerations. "The debriefing will begin immediately," Sir James responded. "My team is already prepared to begin the process, and we estimate it will take approximately 72 hours to gather all the information we require. You will be held in secure but comfortable accommodations during this period, and your departure will be arranged as soon as the debriefing is complete." Prince William had been silent during the negotiation of Isabella's fate, but now he stepped forward to address his stepmother directly. "Before you leave Valdoria forever," he said with quiet intensity, "I want you to understand something. My father is showing you mercy that you don't deserve, mercy that could endanger this kingdom if you betray it again. If you ever threaten Valdoria or its people in any way, I will personally ensure that you face the full consequences of your treachery, regardless of any agreements made here today." The threat was delivered with such conviction that even Isabella seemed momentarily shaken by its intensity. Prince William had inherited his mother's compassionate nature, but he had also inherited his father's fierce loyalty to Valdoria and its people. His promise to pursue Isabella if she continued her treacherous activities carried the weight of absolute certainty. The practical arrangements for Isabella's departure were handled with military efficiency. Sir James coordinated with palace security to ensure that her exit from the royal quarters would be conducted discreetly, without alerting other members of the household staff to the true nature of the crisis. Mrs. Hartwell was instructed to inform the domestic staff that the Queen had been called away on an urgent charitable mission and would be absent for an extended period. The cover story for Isabella's disappearance had been carefully crafted to protect both the monarchy's reputation and national security interests. Official palace communications would announce that Queen Isabella was undertaking a comprehensive tour of international charitable organizations, studying best practices for humanitarian work that could be implemented in Valdoria. The tour was described as open-ended, allowing for her permanent absence without arousing immediate suspicion. Media management was a crucial component of the plan to minimize the scandal's impact on the monarchy. Lord Chancellor Blackwood coordinated with the palace press office to ensure that all inquiries about the Queen's absence would receive consistent and credible responses. The story of her charitable tour was supported by fabricated itineraries and carefully staged photographs that would be released periodically to maintain the illusion of her continued legitimate activities. The debriefing process began immediately in a secure facility beneath the palace that had originally been constructed as an air raid shelter during the Second World War. Isabella was provided with comfortable accommodations and treated with courtesy despite the gravity of her crimes. Sir James's interrogation team worked in shifts around the clock, systematically extracting every piece of information she possessed about Astrian intelligence operations in Valdoria. The information Isabella provided during her debriefing was even more damaging than Alexander had feared. King Leopold's spy network was more extensive and sophisticated than anyone had realized, with assets placed throughout Valdorian society. The foreign ministry official she had identified was immediately placed under surveillance, while the telecommunications engineer was quietly transferred to a position where he could no longer access sensitive communication systems. Most shocking was the revelation that the Astrian Intelligence Service had been actively working to influence the Constitutional Reform Act debate. Isabella had been instructed to provide detailed intelligence about key parliamentary figures who could be bribed, blackmailed, or otherwise manipulated to support constitutional changes that would weaken the monarchy. King Leopold's ultimate goal was to transform Valdoria into a weak parliamentary republic that could eventually be absorbed into a greater Astrian federation. The scope of the conspiracy forced Alexander to reconsider virtually every aspect of Valdoria's recent political developments. Parliamentary debates that he had assumed were driven by legitimate democratic disagreements now appeared to be influenced by foreign manipulation. The timing of certain political crises and media scandals took on new significance when viewed through the lens of coordinated intelligence operations designed to destabilize the kingdom. On the third day of Isabella's debriefing, Sir James presented Alexander with a comprehensive assessment of the damage caused by her espionage activities. The intelligence compromises were severe, but not irreversible, provided that swift action was taken to neutralize the remaining members of the spy network and implement enhanced security protocols. The political damage was potentially more serious, as the revelation of extensive foreign interference in Valdorian affairs could undermine public confidence in democratic institutions. "The good news, Your Majesty," Sir James reported, "is that we now have a complete understanding of King Leopold's operations in Valdoria. The bad news is that neutralizing these operations will require significant resources and could potentially create a diplomatic crisis with Astoria. Leopold will undoubtedly deny any involvement in espionage activities and may retaliate against our countermeasures. The international implications of the spy scandal were complex and potentially dangerous. We can't allow Valdoria to remain vulnerable to foreign manipulation simply because we prefer diplomatic solutions to intelligence warfare." The proposal represented a significant departure from Valdoria's traditionally peaceful approach to international relations, but Alexander recognized that the kingdom's survival might depend on adapting to the realities of modern intelligence warfare. The decision to expand Valdoria's intelligence capabilities would require substantial resources and careful coordination with allied nations who faced similar threats from aggressive neighbors. On the fourth morning after Isabella's arrest, she was escorted to a private aircraft that would transport her to Switzerland, where she had chosen to begin her exile. She carried only a single suitcase and showed no emotion as she prepared to leave the kingdom she had betrayed. Alexander chose not to witness her departure, but Prince William observed the proceedings to ensure that the terms of their agreement were properly implemented. As the aircraft carrying Isabella disappeared into the morning sky, Alexander stood once again at the window of his study, contemplating the challenges that lay ahead. The immediate crisis had been resolved, but the long-term implications of Isabella's treachery would continue to influence Valdorian politics and security policy for years to come. The Constitutional Reform Act debate would proceed without the benefit of foreign intelligence, allowing the people of Valdoria to make their decision about the monarchy's future based on genuine democratic considerations rather than manufactured controversies. The spy scandal had tested Alexander's leadership in ways he had never anticipated, forcing him to balance competing demands of justice, security, and political stability. His decision to show mercy to Isabella had been motivated by practical rather than emotional considerations, though the personal pain of her betrayal would remain with him for the rest of his life. The kingdom had survived its greatest internal threat in generations, but the price of that survival had been the destruction of Alexander's faith in the woman he had loved and trusted above all others. As Valdoria began the process of rebuilding its security apparatus and strengthening its defenses against foreign interference, Alexander reflected on the lessons learned from this devastating experience. The crown would emerge stronger and more vigilant, but it would also be forever changed by the recognition that even the most intimate relationships could be compromised by the ruthless calculations of international espionage. The kingdom's innocence had been lost, but its determination to remain free and independent had been strengthened by the ordeal that had tested every principle and institution that defined Valdorian civilization.